Hi everyone, welcome to the court cards of the cups, and today we're going to talk about Narcissus, who is the Page of Cups in the Mythic Tarot, represented by the Page of Cups. So we're going to explore his archetype now. So there are quite a few stories about Narcissus, or Narcissus is how his name's actually pronounced, and some of these stories actually have progressed not from old ancient Greece, but also Rome and other philosophers. This has become quite a profound story in philosophy, and it does explain the human psychology of narcissism quite well. And it encapsulates, and the Greeks were really good at that, encapsulating the psychology of the human spirit and the archetypes of the human experience. And of course, they did a great job of explaining what narcissism is. So let's go there. So Narcissus was born in Thespe in Boeotia, and he was the son of Cephissus and the nymph Leurope. And his mother was warned one day by a seer that his son would live a long life, because he was, if she wanted her son to live a long life, he must never see himself. He must never know who he is. And he was extremely beautiful. He was a stunning being. He was absolutely gorgeous. And so she did her best to try and keep him away from looking at his own reflection, and to protect him from himself. But he never really truly got a sense of who he was throughout the tale. He didn't live in a relational world, or his relationship was with this perceived grandiose idea of who he is, being this special being that he was portrayed as through the seer and his mother. So his relationship with others was based on him being extraordinary, an extraordinary being. And he got to know himself through this archetype. So he never found anyone that he thought was attractive as he was. He never met anyone that he believed was as good as who he is. And he left a string of broken-hearted girls and a few young men everywhere he went. And he had many suitors. But he was incapable of feeling love for anyone but himself. One day, Narcissus happened to see his own reflection in the water. So his mother couldn't keep him from this prophecy. She couldn't keep him from this prophecy. Eventually, he saw himself and he gazed upon his image in the water, but he didn't realize that it was a reflection. And he thought that he'd finally found someone he could truly love. He was truly attracted to, and someone he found, finally found someone that was truly attractive to him. But he had no idea that it was himself, and it was this unrequited love. He couldn't leave. If he walked away from his reflection, then he would lose this love. So he was so obsessed with this, he tried to kiss the image, but it only created a ripple in the water that hid the reflection. And so he was confused by this whole experience. He was so obsessed with his love, the love for this image of who he had in the water, this image of who he thought was somebody else. And he was so obsessed with that he was never able to touch it, that he wasted away and eventually died of hunger and thirst. He sat by this pool and wouldn't leave. He just sat staring at his reflection, and he wouldn't leave. And at that spot, where he died, a flower bloomed, which is now known as the Narcissus plant, or daffodil. So Narcissus and Echo are another story, and I call it a love story gone wrong. You kind of, in the Greek mythology, you're sort of expecting this beautiful love story, but it doesn't turn out that way. It's quite a horrible story. He's truly a monster. He's not a very kind human being. He lacks empathy, and he lacks this ability of being kind and compassionate, and the empathy that he does have is really only for himself, and to meet his needs. He has this ability to empathize only to get what he needs. So here we have Narcissus in the image. You can see he's looking at his own reflection and he's obsessed by what he's seeing in the image there. And there's a girl that's waiting on the side there, and she's a mountain named Echo, who was the most beautiful nymph. She was absolutely beautiful and a kind person, but she was also one of the friends of the goddess Artemis, who is the goddess of the hunt and of nature and of the moon, and was Apollo's sister. And they were good friends. And she had this problem of speaking too much. She was known as a bit of a blabbermouth. She just would talk a lot. And Zeus would often come down to visit the nymphs. As you know, Zeus had all of these love affairs. He wasn't loyal to Hera, and that sent Hera mad. We know that Hera would cause all sorts of afflictions. She would try and damage people because of Zeus's behavior. She was, insanely jealous and angry and raging. So Zeus loved the nymphs, and he would come down to earth to play amongst the nymphs and frolic with the nymphs. And Hera, being Hera, she followed him. She sought to find out what he was up to, what he was doing, and who he was with. Very suspicious, didn't trust him, and of course there's good reason why not to trust him. And so Echo saw her coming, and she was asked by Zeus to keep an eye out. And of course, being the god of the gods, Echo obeyed him to maintain her life. And she tried to distract Hera from finding him by stopping her in her tracks and talking to her. And of course, she would say so much. And so she was over talking so much that Hera couldn't get a word in. And Hera finally got rid of Echo, but she lost Zeus's trail, and she was furious. She was absolutely furious about that. And he escaped, and she'd known that she'd been tricked. She worked out that Echo had tricked her. And so Hera afflicted her with not only being able to express her love in words, only in echo, but only echoing the last word of every sentence. So she couldn't communicate. She was unable to communicate her love and speak to people. And so her voice became an echo. She was an echo. And Echo wandered the woods in grief, and she came across, as in this wandering, this loss and this grief for her voice and for her life, and for the potential of ever finding love, she came across the most beautiful man she'd ever seen, and that was Narcissus. And she tried to talk to him, but he thought it was his own echo. And of course he did, because he's so narcissistic that he can't see outside of himself. That when he heard that, he didn't think that it could possibly be somebody else. He thought it was him. And he ignored it. He ignored the echo, but he heard it. And finally, though, after trying to get his attention, she approached him and she threw her arms around him, and he rejected her harshly. He just said, "Yuck, get off me. I don't want you. Go away." So callously and rudely and horribly. He was terribly, horrible to her. And then he looked at her and he said, "I could never," he said he could never love her, only himself. And so she roamed the forest, heartbroken, to finally fade away to only an echo. She died in the forest, broken heart. She died of a broken heart. And so Narcissus, being completely narcissistic and incapable of having any compassion for her, wandered through the forest, and he came across some nymphs in a pool, and they all wanted him too, but he refused them as well. They weren't good enough for him. And unlike Echo, they begged Nemesis, the goddess of vengeance, to punish him, to teach him about unrequited love. Teach him a lesson about being mean and harsh and lacking in empathy. So she did. And she led him unconsciously to a pool of water, thirsty from one of his hunts. And he leant down to have a drink. And then he became he became obsessed with his image. He fell instantly in love with his own image, and he thought it was an entirely different person. And he gazed endlessly at his own reflection, which is very poignant in the context of a narcissist. They see who they want to be. They build up a facade, an image of who they want to be, but actually they don't see themselves like that at all. This is the image that the persona that they wear, but actually they have an intense psychopathology of self-loathing. And so he couldn't leave this image. And he finally discovered what it was like to love someone, but to never be loved back. He couldn't be loved back. He couldn't love himself. He just could not love himself, and it was painful, and he was in immense pain. So fearing he would move, that the image would leave him forever, he dies of thirst, and he turns into the flower Narcissus.